Welcome to Prairie Fire Lines, the podcast where we spark conversations about prescribed fire and its role in conserving Canada's prairie grasslands. I'm Kat Zenz, your host and the Communications and Outreach Officer for the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange, or CPPFE. Our mission is to promote the use of prescribed fire as a tool for protecting and restoring the most endangered ecosystem in the world, our grasslands. Through training, planning, and knowledge sharing, we support those interested in conducting prescribed fires. As an interagency collective, we work with organizations across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, providing the resources needed to safely and effectively reintroduce fire, from developing educational courses to organizing prescribed fire training exchanges or TREX events across the prairies. None of this would be possible without the support of our generous funders, the Weston Family Foundation's Prairie Grassland Initiative, as well as our many partners. One of those partners, the Meewasin Valley Authority, not only helps facilitate our work, but also hosts our headquarters in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, overlooking the beautiful South Saskatchewan River. In Cree, Meewasin means it is beautiful. Fire has been a key component of grassland prairies for centuries. Long before European colonization, Indigenous peoples practiced cultural burning, a tradition that continues to play a crucial role in grassland restoration today. The land we work on is the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, including those covered by Treaties 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10, as well as the homeland of the Métis. We honor the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded these lands for generations, including the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dene, Nakota, Saulteaux, Assiniboine, Blackfoot, and Ojibwe nations. Prairie Fire Lines is a show where we delve into the relationship fire has to grasslands. More specifically, we'll talk about all things prescribed fire on the prairie landscape, such as what it is, how it's used, why it's essential, the science behind it, and the many ways it shapes and sustains healthy ecosystems. Each episode, we'll bring in a special guest from the fire world to talk about their experiences using prescribed fire and the many aspects that makes it possible here in the prairies. Whether you're a landowner, someone passionate about conservation, or a curious listener, Prairie Fire Lines will ignite your understanding of why fire belongs on the land and how a healthy dose of fire can help grasslands thrive for generations to come. So cozy up by the fireplace and relax. It's time for Prairie Fire Lines, where we keep the conversation burning. Our first ever guest on Prairie Fire Lines is Renny Grilz. A 2024 Nuffield Canada Agriculture Contemporary Scholar, Renny is the co-owner of Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company and serves as the Resource Management Officer for Meewasin. He's also one of the CPPFE's founding members and plays a key role in the work we do at the Exchange. A distinguished agrologist, Renny is an internationally recognized speaker and advisor, known for his expertise in prairie restoration, prairie ecology, invasive species management, biodiversity conservation, targeted grazing, and prescribed fire. He is an advocate for promoting the role of grazing and fire as key ecological drivers in conserving prairie grasslands, which is reflected in his leadership of prescribed fire efforts at Meewasin. Today, he joins us to share more about how Meewasin's prescribed fire initiatives impact conservation efforts in the Saskatoon region and beyond. Welcome to the podcast, Renny. How are you doing today?
Not too bad, Kat. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, so a neat thing about interviewing you is that you interviewed me 6 months ago when I was interviewing for this position, and now here we are.
Yeah, it's been a great 6 months with you joining us here at the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange. And it is different being interviewed, but in the hot seat, I guess. So.
Well, you are very experienced with the interviews, though.
Yeah, I do a lot of media interviews, radio, television, and the odd newspaper even, so.
Yeah, and it's such an honor to have you as my supervisor, with all your knowledge that we're going to get into. So that leads us to our first question, which is, what was your first exposure to fire?
Yeah, so I grew up in a farm in north central Saskatchewan, sort of between Humboldt and the Prince Albert area. And on the family farm, we would use fire as a management tool for crop residue. And also we would burn our lawn in the spring kind of thing, just to sort of green things up sort of thing in the spring. However, my first real exposure to prescribed fire was my uncle was doing my Uncle Perry was doing his master's degree at the University of Saskatchewan with Dr. James T. Romo. And they were doing a prescribed fire at Kernan Prairie right on the outskirts of Saskatoon. And watching the suppertime news back in the late 1980s, I see my uncle run across the screen, and then I see prescribed fire, and I see Dr. Romo. And that was really my first exposure to prescribed fire. And so my uncle came home for the weekend. I asked him a ton of questions about prescribed fire, why they were doing it and how it works. And then I had the privilege of working for Dr. Romo in the early 1990s as a summer student when I was in high school and then also in university. And I was exposed to prescribed fire there. So I was able to actually apply prescribed fire on the landscape at Kernan Prairie with the university. But also I got to partner with other people as well. And my current role at Meewasin, I'm a resource management officer here. And I got to burn with my predecessor, Luke Delaney, back in the early 1990s on Meewasin sites when I was still in first or second year university. So it's interesting how it's come around almost 30 years later that I'm actually using fire on sites that I experienced when I was in university.
That is interesting. So how long has Meewasin been doing prescribed fire again?
Yeah, so Meewasin, so Dr. Romo, when he came to Saskatoon in the early 1980s, started applying fire at Kernan Prairie. And so he trained other people within the Saskatoon region. So my predecessor, Luke Delaney, started using fire on Meewasin sites in the late 1980s, early 1990s. But he also trained other people like Ed Driver with the Canadian Wildlife Service. And now Canadian Wildlife Service has a really large prescribed fire program at Last Mile Lake National Wildlife Area. So it's interesting how these key individuals have come into an area, taught people, had created this organizational change where fire was used as a management tool. And then now we've seen this change occur again with the funding that we received with the Weston Family Foundation to create the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange, to take the agencies that are doing burning right now and work with other agencies to expand their skills and knowledge to apply prescribed fire onto the landscape.
That's so interesting. Going back to you in your beginnings in prescribed fire as a career, what inspired you to take on prescribed fire and resource management as a career in the first place? Yeah, so my original dream was actually to be a geologist. I was really interested in land formations and exploring northern Saskatchewan as a geologist. And then I got that job when I was in high school with Dr. Romo and working as a plant ecologist for a summer student job. And I'd always been interested in, the farm we grew up on was a sort of aspen parkland. So we had aspen stands, we had wetlands, but we had very little native prairie in the area. And so when I started working for Dr. Romo, I was exposed to the grasslands. And I just fell in love with the grasslands. And I'm still in love with the parklands and the boreal forest, but the grasslands had my calling. And as an plant ecologist, you were exposed to grazing management and how to apply grazing on the landscape to manage our grasslands, and also how to apply fire on the landscape to manage grasslands. And as an ecologist, that just sort of grew in me, and I become very passionate about all aspects of grassland management, and really promoting grazing management and using that as a sound tool for managing these grasslands to keep them healthy, but then also advocating for the use of prescribed fire. And so it's been one of these passions that I've had for over 30 years, and it's been a real privilege over the last 5 years to really share that passion and see new people explore the use of prescribed fire and develop their own passion for it as well. And you don't even just work with prescribed fire. You have so many different roles, working with Meewasin, the CPPFE, running a seed company, and being a Neufeld scholar. How do you manage all of this? Yeah, so I'm pretty busy. So yeah, then there's actually a few other things that I do too that you didn't list. So yeah, so
my full-time job is at Meewasin and managing Meewasin conservation sites in and around Saskatoon and 6,700 hectares of land with our team. And then my wife and I own a wildflower seed business called Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company that my parents started in the early 1990s as well. And so then back in 2024, I was accepted as a Nuffield Scholar through Nuffield Canada. And it's an international scholarship that allows you to travel the world to meet with people from around the world on specific study that you're learning about. And so I was looking at native seed producer networks. So how can native seed producers work together to increase the native seed industry, but also looking at a seed banking project as well. And so that's another project that Meewasin's been working on for the last couple of years, is how do we conserve the genetic diversity of our native grasslands in the form of seed and use that seed in the future for either research or plant breeding or other opportunities. So yeah, I'm extremely busy, but as an plant ecologist and a grassland person, it all intertwines. And so working 18, 19-hour days on all these different aspects is a passion. And I hope I can share that passion with others.
Yes, Renny the all-knower.
I try. I try.
You know so much. Like, as I said, like it's just so nice to have you as the first guest on this podcast, because it feels like every day I'm around you, I'm learning something new every day. This is just so great.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Kat.
So going more into Meewasin and prescribed fire. So we know that prescribed fire is used in like many ecosystems like the forest, but we work primarily with prairie grasslands. So what makes prairie grasslands unique and how they respond to fire?
Yeah, so one way to think of our grasslands is in the prairies here, 10 to 12,000 years ago, we were covered in ice. The large glaciers were across the prairies. As these great glaciers retreated, the bare soil that was left, or the rock, formed soil. There was new plant material that started to grow, and over time this evolved into a grassland ecosystem. And then there was ecosystem drivers that help form and shape these grasslands. So one is the climate, right? We have the wet cycles and the dry cycles and the cold in the winter and the hot in the summer that help form these grasslands. And then also these grasslands evolved under grazing. So historically there would have been plains bison roaming from Texas to northern Alberta. They would have been sort of the mega grazers on this landscape. And estimates were before colonization here on the prairies that there could have been up towards between 60 to 100 million bison roaming across these prairies. And so these grasslands evolved under grazing. And then fire, these grasslands also evolved under fire. So there would have been natural fires like lightning caused in the summertime, but also the indigenous peoples on the prairies would have used fire as a land management tool. And as we talk and work with elders, they share stories about how fire was used on this landscape. And it could have been accidental fires and maybe a campfire getting away, but they would have also used fire as a tool to clear an area for a camping site to remove debris or insects. They would have maybe used fire as a way to enhance areas for food, so say renewal of shrubs and other food species with that fire. But also there's stories and records showing that fire was used as a land management tool, that they were using it to attract bison into certain areas for grazing, and then also maybe using fire to move bison into an area for their hunting. So whether it was for a bison jump or into a compound, they were using fire as well. But so all these, this use of fire on this landscape, the grazing on this landscape and that climate really formed an ecosystem where the plants are adapted to that disturbance. So if you look at our grasses, our grasses in the prairies here typically have really deep roots, in some cases going down 15 feet deep. And so it really forms that really thick layer of roots mass underground. And when you think of like a forest, 90% of the growth is actually above ground and 10% below ground. Whereas in a grassland ecosystem, it's like the ratio is 7 to 1. So 7 parts root system and one part above ground. So if you see that, that grass that's about a foot tall, well, you got 7 to 8 feet below ground of root material. And so these ecosystems are adapted to that disturbance and to that fire. So when a fire comes through an area, it removes that top vegetation, but it doesn't kill that plant because that root system grows back. And some of the research that we've done, we're looking at soil temperatures with a fire, and the amount of 2 centimeters or 1 inch below the soil surface, there's really no, the temperature does not spike. And so it's the heat from that fire is just above ground surface. And so it really has a minimal impact to these grasslands. And so they're really adapted to fire, which is amazing. Some of my travels throughout the world, talking to people from different ecosystems, they're just fascinated about that we can use fire as a management tool for our grasslands here. And this last week, I had a visitor from Australia, a fellow Nuffield scholar, and she had a lot of questions about our use of prescribed fire. And she knows in Australia, the indigenous peoples there use fire as well. So, she was using this as a way to gather information, and she wants to go back home and look and see if fire is a management tool that she can apply to her ranch in Eastern Australia.
Could you expand more on the specific benefits of prescribed fire for grasslands?
Yeah, so within our grassland ecosystems, fire plays a role in multiple different ways. So when you could use fire as a tool to reduce thick litter layers or that dead grass material. So in areas that haven't been grazed for a long time, or you have a big accumulation of biomass, you end up with a really thick grass layer. And so fire can be used to remove that thick grass layer, to open up that site, to allow grasses to reemerge. Also, fire can be used as a way to stimulate seed germination. And so there's been research that has shown that either the heat or the smoke for some species are stimulated for germination after fire comes through. Also, fire can be used as a way for removing woody and shrub material as well. So think of like an aspen stand or wolf willow or snowberry. That fire can be used as a management tool to reduce that shrub cover or that tree encroachment into a grassland. It may be not a one-time approach with fire. You might have to use multiple burns or maybe tie in grazing as well, but it could be used as a tool for that. Also, invasive species can be controlled with prescribed fire. So if you're trying to control, say, an invasive grass like smooth brome or Kentucky bluegrass, or if you're trying to deal with invasive species like leafy spurge, it can be part of the toolbox for managing those invasives. Also, it can be used as a tool to enhance habitat for different species as well, and to enhance biodiversity. And so depending on what your target is or what your species is, you can use fire as that management tool. So some of the work that we've been doing here at Meewasin, we've used fire as a tool to enhance habitat for grassland bird species that like more open grassy areas with less shrubs, or maybe areas with less litter cover. Or we've used it for species at risk, such as Gibson's big sand tiger beetle or smooth goosefoot, which is a rare plant, or endangered plant actually, that requires destabilized sand dunes. And so we're using fire to remove vegetation in these sand dunes, to open up the sand, to expose the sand, and then the species will thrive from that. And so fire can be used for multiple tools, but also could be used as a wildfire mitigation tool as well. So to reduce that fuel load on that landscape, to reduce that risk of wildfire. And so the work that we've been doing at Meewasin, quite often on a lot of our sites, they're open to the public. And so we target our burns along trails, around buildings as well, to reduce that risk to our infrastructure in case there's an accidental wildfire, but then also meeting our ecological objectives as well.
There's so many benefits to prescribed fire, and I'm sure that Meewasin uses all of these in their work. So, pivoting back to Meewasin, so you said that they started doing prescribed fire in the early 80s, correct?
In late 1980s, early 1990s, yes.
Okay. And so, can you recap on why they started doing that at that time period?
Yeah, so Meewasin was formed in 1979, and as part of its organization's mandate, we look after lands owned by the City of Saskatoon, the Province of Saskatchewan, University of Saskatchewan, and lands that Meewasin owns as well. And at the time, we were trying to manage these landscapes with limited tools. It was, the whole targeted grazing concept was not being applied onto the landscape yet. We started using targeted grazing here about 20 years ago. And so we didn't really have any tools to manage these grasses. And so as we learned from other people, so like Dr. Roma at the University of Saskatchewan, and as other people started burning together, we developed that skill set and that knowledge and how to apply the fire to the landscape. And it was also one of these tools that, we were burning fairly small. We were doing very small burns, half an acre to an acre in size, maybe 5 acres maximum. But we were burning to our skill set and to our equipment as well, and our ability to bring people together to burn. But as we evolved our fire program over time and working with the Canadian Prairie Prescribed Fire Exchange and training ourselves and training our partners and getting better equipment, better protective equipment, better hand tools, better equipment to deliver water onto a site, we can actually now ramp up our burning program. Instead of burning 1 or 2 acres at a time, we can burn 50, 60, 100 acres at a time. So now we're having this bigger change and larger impact on that landscape. And so as a management tool as well, targeted grazing is a very effective tool for management, but it's also a very expensive tool as well. Fire can be an expensive tool as well, because you have to have all the equipment and protective equipment, hand tools, and water delivery systems. But it's also manpower heavy as well, because you need a lot of people involved in the prescribed fire. And our agency doesn't have enough staff to burn enough acres to meet our mandate, but we've created this partnership in the Saskatoon region and around Saskatchewan, where if one of us agencies are burning, whether it's Sask Parks or Canadian Wildlife Service or Nature Conservancy of Canada, we all come and cooperatively burn together, and so we could bring resources together and apply more fire onto the landscape more safely.
That's amazing that we have this community to do that. So for burning in this region in Saskatchewan, what is the ideal time to burn and why?
Yeah, so our typical burn window in this part of Saskatchewan is when the snow melts in late March and then through to about the middle of May. After the middle of May, we start having grassland nesting birds, and so we try to restrict our burn activities from middle of May through to the middle to late July. And then again, we start looking in mid to late August until the snow flies in November. However, we have done some winter burns over the years where we've gone in where there's maybe limited snow cover or no snow cover, or we have a nice hot day in January or February. We may go and burn hilltops off. And then also we go and burn quite often in the middle of March between snowdrifts. So as the snow starts melting, the snowdrifts sort of create this sort of nice fire guard, and then we go and burn between the snowdrifts. However, you need the right conditions. You need it above 0 degrees Celsius. You need the grass to be dry, but it's a great way to burn. And then we go in after that snow melts and then burn between those patches that we burnt later in the season. One of the challenges, though, that we have, especially in the spring and the last few years, is typically we get fire bans in the region middle of April because the grass is dry, nothing's greening up yet, and there's usually typically fairly windy. And so there's usually fire restrictions or fire bans put on. So that really restricts our window to burn as well. So we don't get as much burns in the spring as we usually hope for. So then quite often we do fall burns as well. And the one challenge that we've been having the last few years is we've been getting, with the drought that we've been in since 2020, is we've been finding sort of a late season rain in sort of mid to late August, which then causes a green up in September into middle of October before the frost hardens that grass. And so we have a reduced window again in the fall. And so, we're in a sort of a drought drought cycle right now, which is sort of playing havoc with our prescribed fire program. But we can also use it to our advantage. With it being so dry, using prescribed fire can be very effective in controlling tree encroachments like trembling aspen, wolf willow, and snowberry as well, because you run the fire through, you reduce that competition, and it makes it difficult for those trees and shrubs to regrow because of the drought, and that helps the grasses, which are really drought dependent or drought adapted, to really flourish underneath. And so we can use this drought to our advantage. Now, once this drought is over, we'll probably go into a wet cycle. And then what we'll see with this wet cycle is we'll see an increase in fuel, increase in grass growth, which will actually change things with our prescribed fire program, because then now we're going to be dealing with surplus fuel as well. And that creates a different type of fire pattern as well. So we just have to adapt as things change. But typically our fire season is spring and then again in the fall.
And no summer.
And we have done burns during the summer months, depending what our management objective is. But we also have to make sure that we're not impacting wildlife species as well, right? So we have to make sure the grassland birds are not nesting in the area. But we have done summertime burns as well. What's interesting with a summertime burn, it's actually can be relatively safe because the grass is green, so the fire moves more slowly if it's not too hot or too windy. One of the challenges, though, there's a lot of smoke that's generated as well. And so the prescribed fire program that we have here in Meewasin, we're doing a lot of work in acreages around the city or within city limits. So we want to try and limit the smoke management as well.
Interesting. I didn't even know we did the summer burns. I learn something new every day. Can you tell us how much land is typically burned on Meewasin sites like in a year?
Yeah, so it depends on the year and depends on the weather conditions. So this last spring, we had prepared 12 burn units on different sites throughout the Saskatoon region. And we actually only completed one burn unit, roughly about 2 hectares. The snow, just as the snow was melting, we were able to burn a creek slope at Beaver Creek Conservation Area. So there was still snow in the trees and the slopes were bare. As soon as we finished that burn, about 3 days later, there was a fire ban put on within that rural municipality. And so that restricted our fire program within the municipality. We wanted to shift it into the city. However, we never had the right wind conditions to meet our smoke management concerns or during our burn window. So we shifted our program to support others who were doing prescribed fires. So we helped the City of Saskatoon Naturalized Parks program with their burns. And then we also helped Sask Parks with several burns as well throughout Saskatchewan. So that's one great thing about the partnership as well that we've created over the years, is that if one agency can't burn, others can burn, and so we go and help them. Then last fall, we did a series of burns as well. So in a given year, we can do anything from 2 to 5 hectares of land to, back in 2023, I think we accomplished about 150 hectares, which was, one of our best years in burning. But that was tied in through our training exchange program, our TREX, that through the Canadian Prairie Prescribed Fire Exchange. And so we're using quite a few of those burns were part of our training program. And so we were lucky to have that opportunity to burn with all those partners.
So it really just depends on the year and like the certain circumstances. Interesting.
Yeah, and so like this year with the fire bans that were on in the Saskatoon region, it really limited our burn program. And then once the wildfire season started up in northern Saskatchewan and devastating wildfires this year, we canceled our burn program just to be respectful to people, in the north. And then also just, we didn't want to add to that concerns that people have about wildfires.
Of course, that makes so much sense. Can you walk us through the typical day of Renny Grilz in a prescribed burn operation?
Yeah, so typically a day with a prescribed burn operation is I don't sleep properly because I'm throughout the night I'm running through the scenarios of the prescribed fire. So typically with a prescribed fire, we start planning years out, right? We start looking at sites that we want to start burning in, and then we write the burn. We prepare the site for the burn unit. So either put in the fire guards, remove any vegetation, prepare that site, and then we write the burn plan, get the approvals, and then we wait till we have that opportunity to burn. And so when it looks like we have a burn opportunity to arrive, and we start planning, we start watching the weather 2 weeks ahead of time, like, yeah, okay, looks like maybe in a week it'll be good. The weather forecast looks good. And we start watching as it gets closer and closer to a potential burn date. And so on a typical day for pre-burn is the day before we test our equipment, go through the equipment. I go visit the site to make sure everything is still the way it should be and prepared for the burn unit, and maybe have to do any modifications to it that we need to see. We make sure the equipment works. We do a sort of a test of all the equipment, whether it's the leaf blowers, the UTVs with the water systems, everything's fueled up. Then the day of the burn, we notify people the day before that this is a burn window. The day of the burn, we get up early, check the weather forecast at 5 a.m. when Environment Canada publishes the daily weather forecast. And then we make the call. Is this going to be a potential burn day or not? And then we put the call out to everyone saying, yes, we're going to burn, meet on a site at a certain time. We get everyone gets, before we head out to the site, we do another run through of all the equipment, make sure everyone has their protective equipment. We do a run through of the burn plans as well before we head to site. When we get to site, we unload all the equipment, test all the equipment, make sure everything is ready. And then we meet with everyone on site and do a sort of a walkthrough and then a review of the burn plan, and then do as a briefing. We then assign people to specific roles and responsibilities and identify sort of who are the crew leads, who's responsible for ignition, who's responsible for holding, who's the lead of those, and then who's working on the different aspects of holding and ignition. And then we start the burn operations. Once the burn operations are done, we're not finished either. We continue going. So what we have to do is we have to do a mop up, make sure all the fire is out, make sure everything is secure. We do an after action review where we brief and talk about, okay, what went well, what didn't work well, and how can we make things better the next time. And so we use it as a learning experience as well. And then we stick on site as well afterwards, after people start leaving, demobilizing, cleaning up the equipment. We still stay on site for a while to make sure there's no flare-ups, make sure the fire is out, but we also do a bit of monitoring as well. So we take a GPS and track the size of the burn unit, so we have that documented. But then also we take pictures, and then also just make sure everything is secure before we head home. So quite often I'm the last person to leave a burn unit as well. Since I'm the burn boss, I want to make sure that the site is safe and secure. And if things are still smoldering or burning, we'll stay until late into the night to make sure there's no issues and that we don't get any escapes. And then the next day we come back to check the site again to make sure there's no issues as well. And we might have to put out some hot spots, maybe like a choke cherry bush is still burning or something like that. And so, it's not just a walk in, light the fire and walk away. It's, multiple day approach to dealing with one prescribed fire. But if you're running multiple days of prescribed fires, you're having to adjust quickly, and maybe the next day another agency's burning, or you're burning another one of your sites, and so you're always moving on to that next site. But also the key is when you get back to your headquarters or to your shop or compound when you're done at the end of the day, is you rehab that equipment as well. You fill everything up, you get everything ready, because you don't know, maybe tomorrow might be another burn window as well. So it's a big day. It's a big operation, and it's fun, but it's also very tiring, and also can be quite mentally taxing as well, because as a burn boss, I'm always worried about the crew, the public, and the surrounding area, and making sure everything is safe. And then when you're on the line, if you're the ignition lead, you're planning your ignitions. If you're the crew lead, or the holding lead that's suppressing the fire, you're worrying about everyone else. And so it's a lot of thinking and a lot of planning and a lot of discussions and a lot of working. So it's a fun job, but there's also all this other mental preparedness that you have to have as well.
Mm-hmm. It was very interesting for me getting to get out on prescribed fires for the first time this year and getting to see this whole process play out 4 times this year. So it was such an honor to be able to do that and see you in action.
Yeah. Well, it was great that you were able to join us, and I hope you had a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you said, just to clarify, you said you were a burn boss, and there's so many different roles on the fire line. What are these roles exactly? What do they do?
Yeah. So It depends on the terminology that you use. Like every agency uses different terminology, or the United States uses different terminology than Canada. So in Canada, we use the terminology either incident commander or the burn boss. And so the burn boss is sort of the the conductor of the orchestra, right? So he pulls the plans together. He or she pulls the plans together, knows the site, and orchestrates the prescribed fire, and works with the other teams that actually apply the fire onto the landscape. So then we have an ignition team. So this is the team that actually starts the fire and runs, creates that pattern of fire on that landscape. So typically we have 2 people or 3 people on the ignition team, and what they're doing is using tools like something called a drip torch, which is the main tool that we use to apply fire, which is a canister that holds a mix of gas and diesel with a wick on it that drips fuel that's lit, and then drips fuel that's lighted onto the grass that starts the fire. And so they set the pace for the fire, and they use different techniques to start their ignition, and different ways to get the fire to go. And typically we sort of work in where the wind is blowing too. So if the wind is blowing from the north, we start on the south, and we create this sort of catcher's mitt where that create this nice big black area. And then as we move with the wind, we make it bigger, bigger, and bigger. And so it blows into that block. And we could use different techniques as strip fires or flank fires as we make this unit bigger. Then what the holding team does then works with the ignition team to keep that fire inside that burn unit. And so their job is to suppress the fire. And so they work right behind the ignition. So as the ignition team starts the fire, they're actually putting the fire out right on the line. They're letting it back burn into the larger unit, but they're holding it as well. And then also they do the final cleanup after the end of the fire. But then also on the team as well, we have people that are monitoring weather conditions. We have people that are doing information work, that are, maybe if it's a public site, talking to the public. We have people that are back at the sort of the staging area where we have all the equipment, that are there refilling drip torches, or refilling water tanks, or refilling UTVs with gas as well. So it's a multifaceted team working together to apply fire safely on that landscape.
Interesting. So when you're doing a prescribed fire, are there any downsides or challenges that come while a prescribed fire is going on, like while you're on the fire line?
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things when we do a prescribed fire, there's sort of an acronym that we use. It's called LACES. So it's something that we remind ourselves, and that's part of the briefing. And then also one of the things I randomly do as we're doing a prescribed fire is I call out, what are LACES? So LACES are lookouts. So what are your sort of like your head on a swivel. You're always watching, in front of you, but you're also watching on either side of you and also behind you to make sure like an ember hasn't, picked up by the wind and landed in an unburned fuel outside of the burn unit, or that the fire hasn't come around you, or some other safety issue. So you're always on that lookout, and you're also looking for your colleagues as well to make sure that they're safe. So that's L, LACES. A is anchor points. So anchors is where is that area that you're burning off of that's safe and black. So whether you start your fire off the side of a road or a mowed area, and then you burn that black. And then you always want to keep yourself in a safe area, and that's where you anchor yourself to. C is communications. You want that open communication that people are using, communicating back and forth. And one of the tools that we use in Canada is something called incident command. And so we have sort of a hierarchy of commands. So I'm the burn boss, and I have, ignition leads, and I have a crew, holding leads below me, and they report up to me. And then they have people underneath them that report to them. So it's a chain of command that we use as well. So we have good communication. We use radios, and so everyone knows what's going on. E is for escape routes. And so, always know if something happens, how can you get into a safe spot? And typically, the safest spot is the black. So something that has burnt out won't burn again. And so get into, keep yourself in those safe spots. So typically, if you're on a holding team, you're working on, the fire guards, you're working on the sides. Typically, you're in a safety zone. But when you're someone like an igniter who's more inside the grass, inside the fuel that's lighting the fire, they always have to keep in mind where these escape routes are and where these safety zones are. And then S is, as part of LACES, is safety, right? And so, being safe on the line, wearing the proper PPE, wearing, your right clothing material. Typically, we wear Nomex, whether it's a two-piece suit, or it's pants and a shirt, or it's a pair of coveralls. Wear proper headwear as well. One of the things that we've started doing is wearing helmets when we're burning. Typically, historically, we've used ball caps to protect our heads and protect our hair from any heat. But we've started using helmets now just because we're burning in some of that aspen. Also, those helmets reflect the heat a lot better as well. Wear gloves all the time. Quite often wear safety goggles to keep dust out of your eyes or ash out of your eyes. We wear boots as well, leather boots. So that's our safety equipment as well. So having that safety equipment, knowing about safety, and applying that as part of our prescribed fire program.
So going back into kind of the challenges, have you ever experienced a significant challenge on the fire line, or has something gone wrong?
Yeah, and so that's one of the things with our prescribed burn plans, that we plan for ideal conditions, or what sort of the weather conditions we want to burn in, but also we plan for those scenarios if something bad goes wrong, right? What happens if someone gets injured, right? And so we, how do you get them, safely out of the site and to, proper medical if they need. So, that's one worst case scenario. Another worst case scenario is a smoke management, right? So is the smoke blowing into an area that you don't want smoke to go into, especially when we're doing this urban wildland interface. So we may have to actually stop burning, to wait till the wind shifts. And so we're not, sending smoke across the highway or into someone's backyard. Also, the risk of escapes is really high as well. So where a fire the wind may shift and then carry it outside of the burn unit, and then you have to go and chase this fire, and you end up with sort of almost a wildland fire that you're actually trying to put out. I've had a few little small minor escapes over the years, just very minor, where a piece of ash or an ember has crossed the fire guard, and someone who's on their lookouts looking back and forth has noticed this, and the team jumped on it really quick and put it out. Fortunately, I've never been involved with a large escape. They've always been little minor incursions outside of the burn unit. I've never had to deal with a large escape. But however, I've had colleagues that you apply prescribed fire on that landscape in different parts of the prairies have had escapes. And it's one of these things where we use it as a learning experience, right? What happened? How did it go wrong? And how can we make sure, it doesn't happen again, but also share that story with others so that they learn as well, so that they know in the future not to deal with that. And, it could be as simple as, you're burning and one of your water delivery systems, so the UTV with the water tank on the back, ran out of water at the wrong time. And the communication system broke down and didn't notify us that, we're out of water. And instead of slowing the fire down, the system ran out of water. So that could be, one situation that happens actually, unfortunately, quite often. So we're building mechanisms in so that we communicate this, that, we're at half quantity, we're at a quarter quantity, bring in another system so that we have full water supply. And so you're trying to mitigate and reduce those risks is the biggest thing as part of doing prescribed fires, is planning in case those situations happen. How do you deal with it? And quite often what it is you learn through experience, right? The more burns you do, the more repetitions you do, the more you plan, what the potential scenarios are. But yeah, fire is very risky. And so we want to try and do everything to mitigate and reduce that risk.
For sure. It's always a learning experience, as you said. The more burns, the better.
Yeah. And you build up that experience, that knowledge, and the comfort level as well.
For sure. So after you do a prescribed fire, like you go home, you go to bed, finally after a long day working out on the fire line. So after that, how do you measure the success of a prescribed fire?
Yeah, so, and that's something that, is a really important part of prescribed fire, right? Because you're writing every burn that you do, you're there for a specific management objective. And so you want to measure, have you met those management objectives? And so it could be as simple as a photo, photos pre-fire, during, post-fire, and then maybe 6 months later to show the green. Or it could be as simple as, or doing things like vegetation monitoring, where you're collecting samples before the fire and then growth after the fire to see if you cause a species shift. Or you could be doing monitoring as well to see what are the impacts for wildlife. So some of the projects that we've been working on is we go in afterwards and we put in acoustic recorders, or we do breeding bird surveys to record what species are attracted to these areas as well, and see if the birds are using it that were our target species as well. So building these monitoring programs to see if our fire is effective, meeting our management objectives, but also seeing what these short, medium, and long-term changes are as part of the burning as well. And then we can adapt our burn program to meet those management objectives as well.
That's so neat. So with Meewasin, we operate, the Meewasin Valley is largely in the Saskatoon area, right? So what does it take to carry out a prescribed burn on, say, urban land, like here in Saskatoon?
Yeah, so, and that's, I find it's actually quite interesting to do these urban prescribed fires, right? Because it's a lot, you're dealing with smaller land parcels than, say, more of a rural site that could be, 160 acre quarter section in size. You're dealing with small parcels that could be 30 acres in size, and you're doing like a 5 acre burn unit within a 30 acre property. And so that creates a lot of challenges. Quite often these bigger burns are easier to deal with than these smaller burns, because there's so much more can go wrong really quickly because you're in such a confined space. It takes a lot more preparatory work as well. You want to make sure your fire guards are in perfect condition, everything's set up really well. We work very closely with the Saskatoon Fire Department to make sure we have the proper permits in place. We submit our burn plans to them, get the permits within the window that we want to burn in, but also they sort of restrict the times that we can burn as well, as part of a smoke management. They don't want to have smoke hanging in the air late at night, and so we sort of reduces our time in the evening for burns as well. And then one of the other things that we really want to ensure is public safety. All our sites are open to the public, and so how do you manage a prescribed fire when there's potential public on the site, whether it's a hiker coming through, someone walking their dogs, someone on a bike, or maybe a school class coming onto a site that wasn't planned for. So how do you manage that? And so we have to make sure we have people there to work with the public and to help educate the public as well. We do put up notice signs that we're burning, create that awareness, but it's amazing to see people that, you're sitting there doing a prescribed fire and they're watching you, or they'll actually walk right in front of the fire because I'm not sure if they don't understand what we're doing, how dangerous it is, or they see how professional we look and how well we're managing this fire that they think it's safe. And so they're not concerned. So that's one of the things that, is always at the back of my mind on these urban burns is how do we deal with this public? And then two, the next one is dealing with the public or the infrastructure and the assets outside the burn unit. So people's houses, other infrastructure. How do we make sure that if something goes wrong, that we don't have an impact to the public as well? And so it's a real complex planning situation that we have to go through to conduct these more urban or semi-urban prescribed fires. But, however, the impacts can be very powerful, though, too. What we've been fortunate here in Saskatoon with our burn program over the last 30 plus years, the public actually understands the benefit of fire. And the media has been really great here in Saskatoon as well in sharing the story of prescribed fire, coming out and, visiting a site after a fire and seeing the crocuses emerging, or the public actually. I have a story that one of our sites south of the city called Cranberry Flats Conservation Area, we had done a fall burn a few Octobers ago, and I was out on the site doing some work one evening, and some public walked by on the trail, and they couldn't see me, but I could hear them. And they said, "Oh, great, Meewasin did a prescribed fire here. Next spring, this site will have lots of crocuses," right? So it's that, educating and creating that awareness of the public of what are the benefits of fire. And, and it does take a lot of work to create that awareness as well. So one of the things that we do every time we do a burn, we do a media release that describes the fire. We will have media come out on site and do an interview as well quite often. And it's just creating that public awareness as well is a big thing of doing these urban burns.
So how often does Meewasin conduct these urban burns?
Yeah, so we have multiple sites within the city, and typically we try and burn one or two of these sites every year within the city. So, and some of these sites, like the Northeast Swale in Saskatoon, we may conduct up to 3 or 4 different burns on a given year within that unit, which is a larger site. But also our partners with the city of Saskatoon, and then also the University of Saskatchewan has a site called Curran Prairies, the University of Saskatchewan site. And the Naturalized Parks program with the city has multiple parks that they burn in as well. And so, on a given year, between us, our 3 agencies, and Wanuskewin Heritage Park, which is also within city limits, we could probably see up to 8 to 10 burns within city limits of Saskatoon, which, because it's so spread out, people don't realize that there is actually a significant amount of burning done within city limits. And my colleague Moira with the city of Saskatoon this year, she conducted 4 prescribed fires within her parks in Saskatoon. And some were really tiny, the size of this little studio that we're in, but some were, up to 10 acres in size, in the middle of a disc golf and it was a disc golf field with that surrounded a ball diamond. And what was interesting with that burn was as soon as we were, mopping up and finished mopping up and demobilizing and loading up the equipment, the disc golfers were coming through, disc golfing through the middle of the black burnt area. And we talked to them and they were super happy because we reduced that vegetation cover, and they would sooner walk through the black than go through all that tick-infested grass to play disc golf. And so it's really interesting to see how much burning that we're doing in Saskatoon itself.
It's really nice to hear about how positive the public perception has been of these prescribed fires. Like that's really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, and it's we do get the odd person that's asks us why and questions us. And some may have maybe negative feelings towards fire, but I think as we start talking to them and explaining why we use fire. And, fortunately, one of our sites is Beaver Creek Conservation Area, where we've done a lot of prescribed fire there over the years. We have over 30,000 visitors to that site. Wanuskewin Heritage Park has 75,000 visitors a year to that site. So it's a really great way of educating the public to understand why we're using fire as a land management tool. Also with Meewasin, we build a lot of our education programs as well. So we deliver school programs to grade 3 and 5 students at different sites. And we tie in the prescribed fires that we do on these sites into their school programs, and also our targeted grazing program as well when we graze with sheep. That's actually tied into those programs. So it's a great way to educate the public. Also, we do a lot of our experiences programs as well. So like our grazing dinner program or some of our other programs that we deliver, we tie in a theme regarding fire as well. And so the more people we can provide that education and awareness, the better. We also quite often lead a lot of tours for different conferences or different groups that come to Saskatoon. So like next week, I'm hosting a tour, or Meewasin's hosting a tour at the Northeast Swale for Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, where we have 150 delegates from across Canada. We're taking them out to the Northeast Swale to visit that site, and I get an opportunity there to talk about the use of fire and grazing as an urban management tool. And then the following week, I'm at a conference with Climate West talking about natural infrastructure as a climate change mitigation. And what I'm going to be talking about in my discussion is actually the need to manage this natural infrastructure in these urban areas and how important fire and grazing is as a management tool. So the more we talk and educate people, and not just locally, but across the prairies, across the country, the more and more accepting fire has become. The work that we've been doing here in Saskatoon with our partners is viewed by other cities, and they're expressing interest in fire. City of Winnipeg has been using fire for over 30, almost 40 years now, but other cities like Regina, Moose Jaw, Lethbridge, Calgary, and now Edmonton has as well. Edmonton actually started doing their first prescribed fires this last fall and then this spring. But, so we're seeing these urban areas on the prairies are starting to use more and more fire as a land management tool to manage their natural grasslands and vegetation in these urban areas. And so, yeah, it's very exciting to see cities like Edmonton coming on as a partner with the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange and working with us to help build their fire program. The city of Regina sending, having staff from the Wascana Center in Regina, but also City of Regina staff as well, building their management plans for their parks and wanting to manage their park space with fire is really exciting to see.
With urban burning, so how does that compare to the burning in rural areas or even like on Meewasin's conservation sites or on farmland?
Yeah. So, there is a difference, right? So quite often with the non-urban areas, you can set up larger burn units, right? And you may have different management objectives as well. Also, you are quite often within a larger landscape of more and more grass as well. So you have, with your planning, it also creates a lot of issues as well, because in an urban area, your property line ends and you may be up against a road. On a rural area, you may have, hundreds of acres of grass. Your burn unit may only be 50 acres, but you may have 500 acres of grass around you. So you have that potential if a fire escapes, you have a larger area that you have to control in. However, your benefits can also be huge as well, because in these larger lands that you could manage, you can really create a nice mosaic of disturbance, right? So you can have a grazed area, you can have a burnt area, you can have an area that was burned 5 years ago, an area that was burned 10 years ago, an area that was burnt and then grazed. And so you can create this nice large mosaic of different disturbance patterns. Whereas in an urban area, you're creating small disturbance patterns in a small landscape. In a larger landmass, you can create this larger diversity of mosaic of habitats for species or land management, or for attracting livestock into or attracting animals into. We did some work with Dr. Dale Gross he's now with Sask Parks, but he was a PhD student at the University of Saskatchewan at the time. He worked with the Nature Conservancy of Canada at their Old Mountains Back Ranch in southern Saskatchewan to do a study to look at, can fire be used as a tool to attract cattle and bison into areas for grazing? And so his project was, there was 2 prescribed fires, or a series of 4 prescribed fires conducted over 2 years, comparing cattle and bison, because Nature Conservancy has a herd of plains bison on their site. And they used radio collars on the bison and the cattle, and they burnt in these large fields, these large paddocks of grass. And it was a 40-acre burn in each of these test plots. And the research that Dale collected showed that the cattle and also the bison were attracted to these burned areas the year of the burn. So as that grass was burnt and then it greened up in the spring, the cattle would zoom in, or the bison would zoom into these areas and then start, focusing their grazing into those areas. And so you could really use fire as a unique management tool on these large patches. There's different groups that are community pasture associations that are starting to use fire as well. So we had the privilege of working last year during our training exchange, our Trex event here in Saskatoon, with the Aberdeen Municipal Pasture just northeast of Saskatoon. And so that pasture, what they were interested in using is fire as a tool to track cattle into certain areas of their large pastures, but also to clean up an area of areas that maybe the cattle aren't utilizing and to get that fresh grass. And so they've now started using fire as a management tool. And then our partners with the Fire Exchange, the Association of Manitoba Community Pastures, has been using fire for multiple years. And so they're using fire as well in their pastures to either remove old dead grass that the cattle aren't grazing, to reduce that tree and shrub encroachment, but also burning in areas where cattle aren't going to and so the cattle will move in and eat that fresh green grass as well. So it's really interesting to see how these tools can be used on these larger landscapes and these larger ranches and conservation areas to meet some of these management objectives.
I think you talking about all these organizations that do fire, that kind of leads in to your role as kind of like a central figure in the Canadian Prairie's Prescribed Fire Exchange. Sorry,
you're making me laugh. I'm a little modest, sorry.
So, talking more about the Canadian Prairie's Prescribed Fire Exchange, since it launched, have you seen any shifts in how local communities view prescribed fire as compared to before?
Yeah, so we were very fortunate in 2020 to receive funding from the Weston Family Foundation to look at creating a partnership for prescribed fire across the prairies, trying to bring people together, the fire practitioners, to learn and train, so provide training opportunities, to provide opportunities to create awareness and communication, but then also do the science and to study the effects of fire as well. And so the Weston Family Foundation, through their Prairie Grassland Initiative, we were very fortunate to secure some funding from them for 5 years. And so we created, the partners that had been burning together, created this partnership to create the Canadian Prairie's Prescribed Fire Exchange. And so some of the first things that we did was we created an online course with the University of Saskatchewan on sort of the basics of prescribed fire. It's a training module, 15-hour course, which just gives you that basic training and understanding of fire ignition, fire suppression, and how fire works. And that was one of the limiting factors for a lot of groups, is there was no limited access to training for fire. A lot of the training courses that are available for wildland firefighters, typically with agencies that are dealing with wildland fire. And so not necessarily accessible for us groups that are actually doing small prescribed fires that are not tied to these larger agencies. So this was the first step that we did. And then the second step, one of the things that we started doing, was using a model that was created by the Nature Conservancy in the United States called Trexes. So I mentioned the training exchanges. So the intention of a training exchange is to bring people together from multiple agencies or multiple backgrounds to work together on a hands-on learning experience on prescribed fire. And so you do your classroom, there's classroom work, there's in-field work, but you're really applying this in-field live fire application to the land and bringing people together to learn and cooperatively burn together. And then you bring in trainers and mentors to help coach and mentor. So as part of the Canadian Prairie's Prescribed Fire Exchange, we've actually just completed our third Trex in southern Manitoba this last month, hosted by the Nature Conservancy of Canada and their Tallgrass Prairie site, where they've brought trainers in from Parks Canada and the Nature Conservancy. We hosted Trex here every fall in Saskatoon, so we're planning our fourth Trex here in Saskatoon in October. And we've been very fortunate to work with a gentleman named Cody Wallers from Iowa, and he's with the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. And he is a fire guru in the Loess Hills part of Iowa, on the western side of Iowa. And he's been working with multiple partners for the last 20 years to apply good, safe fire on that landscape within those Loess Hills. And he runs a cooperative burn week in that area. And I had the privilege of visiting his Cooperative Burn Week a couple of years ago. And so bringing these trainers up to share their knowledge, their experience, has helped us grow our burn programs as agencies. So with our 3 Trexes that we've had in Saskatoon, we've had quite a few repeat people and agencies, but we've also had new people come in as well. And I've seen agencies grow their fire programs. So for example, Sask Parks with Dr. Dale Gross, they lost their burn program several years ago. The person who was the lead of their burn program came from Wildland Fire, had tons, 40 years of experience, and so they were able to do these large burns. Last year, they started doing, in their initial prescribed fires, some small burns. Canadian Prairie Prescribed Fire Exchange came down to help and sort of coach and mentor. And then this spring, Dale ran 4 burns within 2 weeks, and some fairly large burns that were like 50 acres in size. And to watch him and his team grow in that experience and understand how to apply fire, how to use their equipment, how to work as a team, and then bring in the partners to support them. It was great to see. And it shows the success of this partnership and the fire exchange, how we can help agencies or groups or producers build up their skill set and then develop their own burn programs. My colleague Moira with the city of Saskatoon, herself as well, she had been working with Meewasin and coming to our Meewasin burns, and we were helping her with her burns. And then as we had these training exchanges developed, she has developed her skill set to now she's running her own burns by herself. And she's, she has a very small team as well with a few trained staff, but she can bring the partners together and she can direct these larger burns on her sites as well. And so it's really fascinating to watch these organizations build up their burn programs, build up their training, their skill sets, their knowledge, build up their inventory of equipment, and watch them deliver their own burns with other agencies supporting and building up their and it's really great to see. And then seeing new agencies that want to use burns. They've come to see maybe a training exchange or attended a workshop or the Prairie Fire Summit that we hosted last year, to see what we are doing about fire, then going back to their home agencies and working with their management team, saying we can apply fire here, and they're starting to build their fire programs as well. So it's been really exciting over the last 5 years, and we're looking forward to the next 5 years of the fire exchange and some of the great projects that we're going to be looking at, and watching more groups and more agencies and more producers and landowners working together to build that fire culture here in the Canadian prairies.
For sure. I've only been here for 6 months, but even in these 6 months, it's just so nice to see how these organizations interact with one another and how these prescribed fire programs are just growing so rapidly in such a short period of time. It's really fun to see, and I'm excited to see the future of the CPPFE, which brings me to ask you about that. So as someone who's so deeply involved in the exchange, what is your vision for its future?
Yeah, so I guess I have a multi-pronged vision. I just turned 50 this year, and so I'm starting to get a little long in the tooth and starting to get a little bit too old to be on the fire line.
Happy birthday.
That was 6 months ago. But yeah, so, as someone who's been using fire on the landscape, since, my, late teens, I really want to see that building up that fire culture, and try and rebuild that fire culture that we had in the 80s and the 90s, and getting more people excited about using fire safely on the landscape. And I really want to emphasize safely on the landscape. And, getting more people trained, exposed to fire as well, and learning about it, and then having that hands-on practical experience. And then as they go and, start working with other agencies or within their agencies, starting to build that fire culture as well. But also I want to see sort of these regional hubs form of agencies working together to burn together. So in the United States, they have something called burn associations, where you got local ranchers and farmers and conservation groups and municipalities working together to work, to apply fire on that landscape. And so they just rotate around burning together. And so one of my visions with the fire exchange is see these burn associations start forming here in Canada. Our first burn association was formed last year in southeastern Manitoba in the Tallgrass Prairie. Stewart Burn Association, which is in the rural municipality of Stewart Burn. And the local landowners have been watching Nature Conservancy apply fire on the landscape within that rural municipality. And they want to start applying fire on that landscape as well. So they've created their own burn association. Here in Saskatoon, we have multiple agencies burning together. And you wouldn't believe the number of landowners within the Saskatoon region that ask me, Renny, can you guys come out and help me burn? And so one of the things I want to do is look at how can we create these burn associations where we can figure out the liability and the insurance issues, but also create this large partnership of volunteer firefighters and municipalities and community pastures and landowners and agencies all working together and set up a series of these across the three Prairie provinces. And so we build these sort of local hubs of fire excellence, and then that'll spread out further to other areas. Also, we get a lot of interest from different groups across Canada that want to create their own fire exchanges as well. Whether it's in British Columbia or Southern Ontario, or areas where they use fire as a land management tool. And so how can we build this network of fire exchanges across Canada? In the United States, there's 15 different fire exchanges, mainly focused on the science aspect, but also, looking at fire as well. And here, is there an opportunity to create these hubs of fire knowledge and experience within Canada? And so that's another thing that I'm hoping within the next 5 to 10 years we can create as well. And then also opportunities to work with different groups to create more training programs that are accessible to agencies, to conservation groups, to landowners, to Indigenous communities, so that they can get the training they need to apply fire safely on the landscape at a reasonable cost and also easily accessible as well. So increase that training. And then also opportunities to share for agencies to officially sign partnership agreements to burn together as well. So with the last few years with the fire exchange, we've seen multiple agencies sign partnership agreements to burn. So like for Meewasin, we have agreements with Canadian Wildlife Service, Sass Parks, Nature Conservancy, and other groups that we can jointly burn together. And, like to see a network of these across the country, across the Prairie provinces, that multiple agencies can burn together and share those resources and personnel to get more fire on that landscape safely.
So that is actually all the questions I have. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, fire is a tool that can be applied to our landscape to help enhance and conserve our grasslands. It's one of the multiple tools that are available. Grazing is a very important tool, but I think the combination of grazing and fire, when used the right way, can really be used to be effective in our landscape. And what's really exciting to see is groups like community pasture associations and individual ranchers that are interested in fire as a management tool. And then we need to find a way to make that work for them, right? How can we work with them to apply fire safely on that landscape? Give them the training, give them resources, help them support them with the equipment, help support and train them to do this safely. And so there's so many opportunities out there, and there's so much interest in prescribed fire that I think we're seeing a real exciting times here in the prescribed fire world in the prairies.
We are indeed. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Renny. In the first episode, once again, it's just such a privilege and an honor to work under someone who's so knowledgeable and passionate about prescribed fire.
Well, thanks, Kat. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Once again, a huge thank you to Renny for coming on the podcast. His insight not only gave us more of a look into prescribed fire at Meewasin, but also the entire Canadian prairies. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow Prairie Fire Lines on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. And be sure to follow the Canadian Prairie's Prescribed Fire Exchange on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, or visit our website at grasslandfire.ca to stay updated on all things prescribed fire in the prairies. Once again, a huge shout out to the Weston Family Foundation's Prairie Grassland Initiative for making this project possible, and to all of you for listening. Until next time, stay curious about the power of prescribed fire. This is Prairie Fire Lines, where we keep the conversation burning. And I'm your host, Kat Zenz, signing off.